we've come with that, how do we now respond? And some of you would have, all of you would have should have got the agenda. And apologies for getting it late, but you should have got the agenda. It's a short report, very concise. So I hope everyone's been able to read it. At the end of the report, there are questions that we want to start thinking about. Where how far we've come with the recommendations, what needs to be looked at again, and what really, if anything, do we need to bring forward? And I think when we get to that point, we will discuss that further. Tim, I'm not sure whether David's through.
He is now, yes.
Okay, so David, welcome. I know that you're going to have to leave early. Is that true?
Sadly, yes. I have to leave at 7 because we have the Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Commission.
Right. Okay. Apologies for the clash. You know how diaries are. So what we're going to do is that we're going to have an overview of the report, and I'm going to give David an opportunity to ask any questions or any points that he wants to make before 7 o'clock, if that's okay with everyone. So let's do a round of introduction. I've done myself. Alice, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Councillor Alice MacDonald, Councillor for Newington Ward.
Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Peter Vudu, I'm Labour member for Rye Lane Ward.
Okay. William?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor William Humble from London Bridge and West Bermondsey Ward.
Thank you. Jason?
Councillor Jason Ottery, Councillor for St Giles, Camberwell Ward.
Okay. David?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor David Noakes, and I'm a councillor for Borough and Bankside Ward.
Welcome, David. Doreen?
Hi, my name is Doreen Sinclair McCollin. I'm chair and founder of Elevated Minds CIC.
Okay, Carl?
Hi everyone, my name is Carl Canadu. I'm co-founder of 2 to 3 Degrees, a social enterprise that works with young people.
Okay, thank you. Nigel? Nigel's on mute. Nigel, you'll have to unmute yourself. All right, let me come back to you, Nigel. Lisa?
Hiya, Lisa Dalton, Secretary of Manor Estate, TRA.
Okay, and then let's go. Nigel, you're still muted. So if you can work on your mute button, I'll come back to you. Bethan?
Hi, I'm Bethan West. I'm the interim head of the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub working in community safety.
Okay, Pamela?
Hi, I'm Pamela Witter and project lead for the Positive Futures Fund.
Okay, Sharon?
Okay, I'm Sharon Upton, the Safer Communities Team Manager. Oh, put my camera on. Yeah, so I'm Safer Communities Team Manager at Southwark Council.
Thank you. Tim?
Tim Murdoch, Constitutional Officer and Clerk of this meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Caroline?
Hi, I'm Caroline Thwaites. I'm the Assistant Director for Community Safety at the Council.
Stephen?
Evening, everyone. I'm Stephen Douglas. I'm Director of Communities at Southwark Council, and Community Safety sits in my portfolio.
So if I've forgotten anyone, and you, Nigel, have you been able to unmute? No, I think Nigel's going to be muted for a good part of the meeting. So Nigel works with Inspire, and they provide a holiday club in the Walworth Road. And so he's going to hopefully be able to talk about what they do. So Nigel, hopefully you can manage your and find out what's going on with the mute button. Okay, so thank you everyone to come into this meeting. As I've said, we met last year, and we want, as part of the recommendation, that we were meant to come back and look at progress and look at where we are. So I'm going to ask Caroline just to give a brief summary of the report that was sent to you, where we are, and then we can have a quick discussion. And then I'm going to ask David to come in with any questions or any points he wants to ask now, or anything he wants us to consider as we look about what to do next at the end of the meeting. So Caroline, over to you, please.
Okay, thanks, Evelyn. It's quite difficult to summarise the report. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to have a look at it. Apologies for the lateness, as Evelyn said. Clearly you can see some mixed picture in terms of some of the delivery around the recommendations. In terms of the report itself, and the panel made 18 recommendations as part of the process under 5 thematic areas. As I said, delivery is very much mixed in terms of progression, and that was pre-COVID as well. I'm going to ask Sharon Ogden very quickly to just give you a very clear or concise overview around performance in a minute. I think what I would say just before that is, in the report itself, we've kind of gone through some of the key achievements under each thematic area, and also included some of the challenges in areas, which hopefully will help generate a discussion this evening. I think what's really interesting is today the Youth Violence Commission, which was a national piece, launched their report, and interestingly enough, it very much how can I put it, undertook a panel, the commission nationally, and focused on thematic areas that we were focusing on locally too. And interestingly enough, some of the challenges that we'll discuss this evening that are in the progress report are not challenges that nationally areas face. So very much around exclusion, youth provision, and hope funding. So I think a lot of that stuff really resonates with us locally, really. But Sharon's going to just give you a bit of a picture before I come on to some of the key lines of progress.
Okay, I will try to keep this brief, because I can really talk statistics forever. I think first thing just to admit is that we are a high volume knife crime borough, and I don't think there's any way of getting around that. By our kind of the nature, our population levels, our footfall, our demographics, you know, the deprivation levels, etc. That is the kind of the reality for Southwark. However, having said that, what we are doing is that we are making improvements in our knife crime kind of offence volumes. We are seeing good reductions, and the reductions that we are seeing, A, they're consistent, and B, we are seeing greater reductions, kind of improvements than the London average and some of our neighbouring boroughs. So just to kind of throw a few figures at you. So for financial year 1920, so that ended in March 2020, we saw a 3.5% decrease in knife crime offences. The NPS, so London as a whole, saw a 5% increase. So we very much, you know, had very good performance against that whole London picture. We also improved kind of our ranking. So we historically have always been in the top 3 highest volume boroughs, and there's 32 boroughs. So we've always been in kind of the higher ones. But what we improved in the last financial year, we moved from 2nd highest to 6th highest. And that has kind of been consistent now. So for the last 6 months, whereas we said we were always in the kind of top 3, we're now kind of in the top 4 to 6. So we're kind of improving long term. Just to kind of just bring things a bit more up to date, for the 12 months to May this year, so May 2020, we've seen a 10% reduction. And again, this is against a London reduction of 5.6%. So again, I said we recognise that we are high, and obviously there's still lots of work for us to do, but we are kind of outperforming the kind of the NPS and our neighbouring boroughs, which is good news. We're going the right way. And we'll just touch on kind of the impact of COVID, which has obviously impacted all kind of crime over the last 3 months. We've seen a 39% reduction in knife crime. That's over the last 3 months, and that's actually very similar to London, which has seen 41%. So we're very kind of the same level there. Although obviously, unfortunately, we have seen some fatalities, very sadly, in the last few weeks. So we very much acknowledge that we have got more work to do. But the good news is that kind of where overall we're seeing good decreases, we're seeing better than the London average decreases. And as a result, we're kind of dropping down that table, which is where we want to be.
Thanks, Sharon. Tim, can I just ask you just to pop page 14 onwards up, please, on the screen, Appendix 1. Okay, not to worry.
Just bear with. No, it's happening. It's happening.
That's fine.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, thank you. If you can just scroll down, and I'll just ask you to kind of scroll down as and when.
Okay.
As I said before, 5 thematic areas, 18 recommendations, slightly mixed picture in terms of delivery pre-COVID-19. So the first thematic area, early years in education. First recommendation was to undertake a more in-depth scrutiny review on school exclusions, managed moves, off-rolling, homeschooling, and alternative provision and its impact. I won't go into too much detail because I'm conscious of time and also conscious that the councillor is going to kind of give us an overview of the commission that's been undertaken. So in terms of outcome, effectively that's been completed. In terms of this recommendations, and that recommendation is very much around pursuing a new bold partnership with schools. As I said, that's going to be covered a little later in the agenda, so we won't go into too much detail. In terms of the co-production of a charter on preventing school exclusions, working with schools, young people, parents and carers, that's showing on the RAG rating as amber. So I'll talk you through briefly. Some of the work has started pre-COVID on the consultation of a charter. That hasn't been developed or finalised or even launched, which is why it's amber. Very much the focus around this, although the engagement with schools started pre-COVID, especially around an inclusion conference that our school and education and early help colleagues led on, there is obviously more work to be done, and that work also needs to be informed by the Business Scrutiny Commission on education around the exclusion and the scrutiny review. So we will be looking, as part of this process of review, we'll be looking at whether that recommendation needs to be slightly tweaked pending the recommendation around the scrutiny review on exclusions. Interestingly enough, I suppose that again in the main report, you'll see some under the challenge section, and again, this I'm sure will come back out later on in the agenda. There's still some real significant challenges around working with schools and about the legislation and around who owns the exclusion agenda. It very much at the moment sits within that kind of school environment, and as I think we've discussed over the panel sessions, and things haven't changed, that the consultation and co-production of schools really does need to be alongside academies, and that takes time, and there are different dynamics that need to kind of be developed around that. Interestingly enough, the education event that was held in June last year, interesting enough, I see there's a high point on that, 16th of June 2020. That was the event itself was held in 2019, but it was very much about bringing the school community and local authorities together around how they, on a voluntary basis, could work together to agree some key principles around this subject. I was actually at the event myself that was led by Education Early Help. Really good attendance and some really good kind of conversations around how we as a partnership could come together to try and improve some outcomes around some of the kind of co-production of a charter, really. So we'll need to be revisiting that recommendation because at the moment it needs to be informed also by the Commission's work as well. It also needs to be informed with regards to the impact that COVID's had. because obviously with children out of school, the exclusion rates over the COVID lockdown period will be non-existent. And I know, talking and working with colleagues across education schools, that we will need to, there has been engagement, but like as we return into normal in September, will be very different. So we will need to adjust some of our delivery work.
Caroline, can I just stop you there?
Yeah.
Can I ask everyone to please mute? Please mute your buzzer. It helps with the feedback. Tim, you're not muted, so can you please mute? Yeah, great. Thank you. So Caroline, you got about 6 minutes there, so.
Right, I'll quicken up. Okay, so under that thematic area also, there was a key recommendation around providing information resource pack for education settings on violence and vulnerability. That's showing as amber, so there's more work to be done on that. Some of our work to date has been informed by the development of a shared narrative, which Bethan will talk a little bit more about in terms of what the violence profile in Southwark looks like and how we can use that to work with local education settings, including referral pathways and access to support, but also how we bring our services across the council and partnership together, including people from our early help services. So again, I think the proof in terms of the narrative in the appendix, if you keep going through, I'll highlight some of the kind of key areas. So in terms of that resource element, we've got a very good, robust school safeguarding infrastructure in place, which we're using to support and roll out that information and resource pack. Moving on to the avocation of a zero exclusion policy to central government. Also, that's very much a political recommendation. I'm not sure that Evelyn wants to add anything at some point this evening about it. But in terms of what has been done, I think towards the end of the panel, the Timpson Review was published, and that was very much around work with schools and exclusions. I know the Cabinet Member for Education, Children and Families, wrote at the time to the Education Secretary setting out and obviously wanting, welcoming the Timpson Review recommendations, but also advocating around this whole area, including the risks and impacts of school inclusions. Okay, I'm going to little down. Thank you, Tim, for sliding it down to the next page. Under the next thematic area, mental health and public health approach. I think some real progress has been made in this area. As you can see in the table, I think it's quite self-explanatory in terms of working in partnership around promoting mental health and well-being of young people. We've had the Nest open in Southwark, and although due to COVID, there is very much the access service is remote. We will be clearly phasing back in the new and opening up the Nest, but obviously running alongside that, ensuring that there still is remote access for young people. In terms of the progress, as I say, I won't go through all of it, but also I think just to reinforce our current multi-agency arrangements around the anti-violence agenda already has embedded forensic mental health practitioners. Also, just to highlight, clearly one of the recommendations was the local authorities' pledge around mental health for young people. In terms of that, that is very much, it's green in terms of RAG rating. This is around Southwark children and young people getting access to emotional wellbeing and mental health. It's also ensuring that those waiting times are reduced and families have quicker access and are well supported in this area. The other element for us around the public health approach, which is an area around violence that's talked about a lot. We'll talk about it slightly later in the agenda, but our new community harm and exploitation reduction plan is very much based on a public health foundation framework with the key areas of a public health approach to violence. In the RAG rating for that is still amber because there is still some work to be done with regards to sharpening up the different elements of the framework, but that very much links into what Bethan West is going to talk about a bit later around our local violence reduction unit. Sorry, I'm really whistling through here. In terms of the role model and parents and carers thematic area, this is an area that's amber. There has been some work in this area around supporting parents and the wider community, and we're doing that through the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub, but we're also doing that in terms of building and strengthening our kind of parents and support our support for families through our early help offer. In terms, as I say, the amber, there is more to be done around that and how we link to the work with primary schools. But we'll talk slightly more about that because I'm conscious of time when we talk about the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub. In terms of promoting and raising young people's aspirations, as you can see, that's green. I think that's quite ambitious as a green RAG rating. We do a whole raft of different supports across the partnership in the mentoring and pathway process. I think we still have a way to go with regards to putting together and knitting together what currently exists for young people around that whole mentoring framework. Lots of resource out there. I think there's still a question about how we quality assure and we ensure that young people in the right place at the right time for the right reason have the appropriate access to that support, really. I'm going to whistle through. We've, in terms of looking at consulting young people on the best way to recognise and reward them, I think, again, RAG rating is amber here. Pre-COVID, the local authority started undertaking a comprehensive youth review. We're hoping that the second part to that review will very much look at the positivity and how we can build youth provision moving forward that recognises young people and gives them more hope, and also focuses very much on identity and positive focus, really. The next thematic area is criminal justice and police. The local authority continue to kind of politically advocate for more resources at that local level. I don't have the figures on me, but across the Lambeth-Southwark Borough Command Unit, we have more police officers across the BCU now than we did last year. I'm happy to circulate figures when they're disaggregated, and I believe part of that increase is going out on that at that neighbourhood level. But obviously continuous campaigning around the increased boots on the ground, as they say. In terms of communication between police and young people, it's showing amber, and it's showing amber, although we have got some really good programmes, including the development and setting up of a local young independent advice group that is led for young people in the borough. I think there's a long way to go, and we're really hoping, as part of the Southwark Standing Together process and consultation, that we're going to be really drawing out young people's views around policing in the borough, and how we can continue and improve significantly the confidence and the relationship between young people, the wider community and police, especially around areas like stop and search. I think we're coming to the end here. In terms of youth and community services, again, one of the recommendations was to ensure that Southwark people are used to redesign positive or youth provision. We're going to hear from Positive Future programme initiatives, which is really exciting, a bit later. But this recommendation is currently showing amber, but it's also linked into the council's strategic review services that I've just mentioned. There's still a way to go around that provision, and I think there's also some way to go around how you put young people at the centre of the development and commissioning of services as we move forward. Again, in terms of the work that we're doing with the voluntary sector, again, we've got a strong relationship with the voluntary sector, but part of this recommendation was also around how we work with faith groups and TRAs. And again, there's quite a mixed delivery picture there, some challenges in terms of resources, and again, how we coordinate that. But I think clearly a good start has been made, and we will be using the development of the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub as an anchor to support the ongoing development of that work. Just coming to the end here, there was a key recommendation from the panel around better use of community-led organisations and TRAs. That's showing red, and the key reason for that is there's a resident involvement review that took place pre-COVID, and some of the recommendations are still being implemented. So although there's areas like the Brandon estate where pre-COVID there was community asset being used and TRAs on that particular estate, we've got some kind of best practice that's been developed. The piece across the borough, we've got over 90 TRAs. That work is still needing to be progressed. And last but not least on there, I believe, the recommendation around ensuring that strategically when we commission, that we ensure that youth violence is a key consideration in everything we do as a commissioner within the council. At the moment, that's showing amber. There is some good pieces across the council, but that does need to be built and strengthened with regards to ensuring, a bit like Section 17 of the Crime Disorder Act, where you have to consider crime and disorder in your planning and everything you do. We still need to be doing work across that wider strategic piece to ensure that violence is on everyone's agenda, because in some way, and I think about the council in particular to finish, every part of the council can have an impact on this agenda. It's just about working out what that actually means, both directly and indirectly. So apologies, I really whistled through, but I'm going to pause there, Evelyn. Is that okay?
That was perfect, Caroline. You did so well summarising that. And I think it gives us a taste of where we are with the recommendations. So obviously that you start to think about our next steps going forward. So David, I'm going to give you an opportunity because of your time. Is there anything, any questions you have or any points you want us to consider as we carry on this meeting? After you, we're going to hear from Councillor Babudu, who led on exclusion examination, and then he's going to update us, and then we're going to hear from Positive Futures as well, and then obviously the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub. So there's a couple of things that you will miss, but is there anything now that you want to raise before you have to leave?
Just a few points if I may, Chair. So I suppose I just want to make a few observations that obviously since COVID-19, obviously I think there are some increased concerns around youth violence in the sense that some of the sort of adult guardians that have been around and to sort of keep an eye on young people have not been present recently, so as in the idea of teachers and youth service workers, etc., have not had the sort of level of contact that they previously had. Obviously, the fallout from COVID-19 from the point of view of employment opportunities, from increased poverty and sort of reduced opportunities around apprenticeships and things like that all seem to be sort of worries, I think, are things we should be concerned about, because all the indications are that I think young people will be disproportionately impacted by the economic fallout from COVID. So I think my thoughts around our recommendations is, I suppose the one is, and maybe Peter will be able to update us on this, but one is around the Positive Futures Fund and whether there are further rounds. I have to say, I don't know if I think it comes to an end in 2022, but I just wondered if there are further opportunities in the Positive Futures Fund, and perhaps to have some sort of, prioritisation around supporting young people, in particular in regards to things like sort of role models and preventative work. And also on that theme, I just wondered also whether we as the council should be considering whether we should request, for example, like in CGS monies, Democracy Fund, neighbourhood funds, that a percentage of each ward's bids should go to young people's projects. I know we don't normally do that, and I'm loath to interfere with local councillors' decision-making processes, but I just think that when I look back at what we give very often in our CGS and neighbourhood funds, that, it's mainly for adults that we're giving it to, and maybe there needs to be some consideration that there should be, 10 or 15% or whatever, 20% should be sort of ring fence for young people to encourage them to bid for monies. I think the other thing is, I suppose there's an issue, an ongoing issue with trying to improve the relationship between the police and young people, and obviously the sort of, again, the often visited topic of stop and search. My personal belief is that intelligence-led stop and search is something that we need to have, but I do think we need to look again about how we can improve this more quickly, particularly locally in Southwark, and what additional work we can do around that to sort of further improve relationships between the police and young people. And I think my last point is, well, possibly around, because I think there's, I've heard some evidence that that some of the gangs have been recruiting particularly young women during the COVID-19 lockdown, and I think they're, sadly, I'm not sure that they have stopped their work during the last 2 or 3 months, and it just sort of reminds me of the pressures that young people are on to get involved in gangs, and then perhaps sometimes to carry knives and weapons, and just whether there's any more that we can do, or any more resource that we can put into role models and sort of youth activists to try to sort of, well, and also around the awards, I suppose, recognising young people who are doing good things. We talked about having some sort of scheme to recognise young people, because too often they're talked about in negative ways, and just whether, again, there is something that we could bring forward on that more quickly to sort of support young people. Thank you.
Excellent, David. There's a lot here that we will discuss more, but I think just before you go, I just want to kind of respond to some of your questions. Concerns of young people with regards to adult guardians. I mean, you're so right that because of COVID, there's a lot of, we're talking about unemployment, there's so much that would affect young people indirectly and directly going forward. So with regards to apprenticeship, I know the cabinet member for that area is looking at how we can support young people getting more apprenticeship, how we can safeguard apprenticeship. So this is something that is key on our minds, and we are working towards that. The Positive Futures Fund, we have been having discussions. Obviously, that we are refreshing our plan now and looking at our budget. We are thinking of how we can put that in the baseline of all our budgets, so you can carry on going. At the same time, we're having a youth review, and the youth review is looking at how we can streamline the funding. So instead of having so many pots going to different people, because every year we fund the same people all the time, why don't we have one pot that people can bid for, and then we can that same pot individuals can bid for, or we can fund organizations with it. So something that youth review is looking at. I don't want to preempt the outcome of that, but it's something on our minds. The request to see CGS money, so right on that. And I think what I've been doing actually is speaking to, I would say, kind of hotspot wards about making sure that they kind of fund more youth activities. So I'm doing it on that kind of a one-to-one basis. But I think if we request it on a blanket basis for all wards to consider that, I think that'd be a good idea, and we'll see how we can take that forward. Neighborhood fund, I've mentioned that. Police and young people, I mean, this is definitely an ongoing issue, and it's obviously come to the fore now, especially with stop and search. I mean, talking about that, we had a discussion with a Superintendent, Anne-Marie Cowley, about stop and search. Was it 2 days ago, Caroline? Looking at the data, looking at the kind of demographics of who's been stopped, and this is something that we're going to carry on doing. What I've asked from her is to have data, regular data about the stop and search in Southwark and the outcomes and who's been stop and search and why they've been stop and search, and we can look more into that. But as Caroline said, we are looking at kind of putting together this month a youth independent IAG, independent something group, independent advisory group. And they will be working with the police. And what I've also requested from the police is that they get involved with training. I think the training of new policemen, or ongoing policemen, is really, really important. So this is something that is going to be created this month. Your point about young women, it's probably likely. I know that the crimes and gang moved to a different mode of operation during COVID, and a lot of them was virtual. So I think we just have to now be nimble enough to be able to respond accordingly. And I think this is something we'll probably have to get more information on and how we respond going forward. So I think I'll leave it there, and we will discuss more about the points. I mean, there's a lot here that I think we can take forward, and just want to say thank you. And I will just open up to one question before we move on. No, in fact, I won't because of time. So what I'm going to ask is, Peter, if you can summarize your scrutiny on exclusions. And I just before that, I just want to say I read the report, and I am still very much concerned about exclusion in the borough. I think across London we know it's an issue, but I think in Southwark, and we're dealing with Southwark, we know, I mean, from the report, 2 main schools are responsible for a majority of our exclusion. We know from data that over 80% of those being excluded are from the Black and ethnic minority, which is outstanding. It's just ridiculous. And for me, I think getting data is a problem. And I'm just going to leave it, Peter, to kind of summarize and see what we go from here.
Thank you, Evelyn. You've done a great job of summarizing my report before I summarize my report. So I'll see what I can add to that. I mean, it's felt like really important work that the Commission was doing, and we spoke to a real wide range of people. We got input from schools across the borough, from schools beyond the borough, including people referral units outside of the borough, parents and carers, a lot of officialdom as well, because I think there's a lot of confusion about how exclusions work. So we have the Regional Schools Commissioner come in as well, and I kind of very much welcome the view as we put it in the Serious Youth Violence Panel update report. But there was a lot of challenging stuff we found, is the short summary of it. It took a lot of digging to get reliable stats in terms of the proportion of BAME children who make up our exclusion figures. And at over 80%, just unacceptably high. It's clearly disproportionately. It's double what you would expect. And it's a real concern that we struggle to get the bottom of. And now that it's clear that it's the case, there's one of our recommendations is about the council developing an action plan that specifically looks at that specifically looks at that issue. Once we did get data we could reasonably rely on, we identified that 2 academy chains are driving a significant proportion of exclusions, and that's Harris chain and ARC. And it's worth saying up front that ARC engaged quite positively with the review. They explained their figures, work being done to reduce levels of exclusion, and they did so reasonably credibly, like not totally to our satisfaction, of course. We had Matt Jones, the executive principal of ARC, come in and tell us about the steps he thought were needed so that they could pretty much eliminate exclusions, and that's the kind of engagement we really wanted to see. I'll turn off my video because I think my line's a bit unreliable. We got no engagement from Harris, which was really frustrating. So Harris, Peckham, you'll see a particularly high, there were particularly high figures for their exclusions there. We had them having 15 exclusions in 1 year, which was just incredible. But they didn't engage, and I mean that reflects some of the reality of the current regulatory environment, that councils have somewhat limited powers over schools at present. I'll walk through a few more bits of the report. Our findings kind of broke into 7 main areas. I've spoken about some of the headline figures on exclusions and academy chains driving them. I think it's just important to say that, like, we got really powerful testimony from young people who've been excluded, whose friends have been excluded, about the effect, the toll it takes on them, and the risk it puts them in. We also, in terms of understanding why the exclusions are happening, we heard really persuasively how these kind of strict disciplinarian approaches are often what drives it, like schools with zero tolerance type approaches, but rather than working with a young person excludes them. We heard about people being excluded for eating a biscuit in class. And it's like, if someone's hungry and they're eating a biscuit, you might want to stop them eating it, but to exclude them just beggars belief. That seems important. The Commission also heard about where good practice is happening, and we think there's an important place for that kind of peer working to spread good practice. And we heard from some of the faith schools who quite convincingly set out how they go to great lengths to avoid exclusions, whether that was about looking at internal alternatives where you didn't take kids off site, so they still had some contact with people with their friends, had like deeper involvement with parents, looking at alternative curriculum curricula for children who just aren't fitting in with the mainstream mode of things. Even where children did get a spell in alternative provision, like going to the pupil referral unit or similar, still remaining on the roll of the school and coming right back. And it's things like that that we need to be seeing across the borough. And so the commission really did look into this idea about what would a charter between the council and schools look like. And we made sure to get the chair of the Southwark Association of Secondary Head Teachers, Matt Jones, to come in and speak to the commission about how that might happen. And what was really interesting to hear from him was, and I'd say that speaking to a fair few heads in the course of doing this work and attending a heads conference arranged by the education team in the council, a lot of heads did complain that they would flag children in need of mental health and other support, and they just wouldn't get it. So there was some challenge to the council of like, oh, we think early stage support, there could be more of it. And I know that we mentioned about some of the steps being taken there, but there's a clear ask that we go further on it, and that the council used to play certain roles in terms of heading off some of these early issues that it doesn't anymore. So I think that was a legitimate challenge to us. But we talked with Matt Jones and other heads about what a partnership might look like, and I think it'd be great if the kind of the commission and the panel align really in terms of the sort of charter we're pushing for, recognizing that it needs to be bold and it needs genuine commitment from schools to be something that they wouldn't walk away from. I'll just touch on some of the other areas of the report which I think are quite important. Off-rolling. That was so one of the few areas that the council does have quite a clear responsibility is in terms of receiving data about deletions from the school roll, and the commission found that the council was often getting quite poor data. So like we found instances of like hundreds of fixed term exclusions just missing from what's reported back to the council. So that's a clear area that we should look at. But we also identified over the course of the commission's work that we think there are real issues in terms of how we're looking at suspected cases of off-rolling. The council's improved its systems and is using a methodology borrowed from Ofsted to try and identify schools where there's higher levels of deletions from the roll than they'd expect. But the commission was not satisfied that we're doing enough to identify possible off-rolling and to challenge it when it occurs. And I think part of the tension there is the council knows that it has limited powers in this area and tries to maintain good relationships with all schools. But where we think that they're off-rolling children and removing them from the school when they shouldn't be, we should challenge that vigorously. That much is certain. The commission also looked at levels of home education across the borough, recognising that parents and carers have a right that's enshrined in law to home educate their children. But our concern was about the appropriateness and circumstances with which this was happening. And again, there the commission had real concerns with what we found. The numbers of children being homeschooled has just risen considerably in recent years. I think we said near doubled. And the council, by its own data, feels that those who are becoming homeschooled tend to have more profound kind of learning difficulties, and so there are real questions about the appropriateness or the ability of many parents and carers to meet their home education needs. We found it quite difficult to get at whether parents felt that they'd been pressured into home educating their children, but from anecdotal evidence we received through the course of our work, that does seem to be that's certainly an issue that happens, where parents or carers are kind of encouraged that if you don't make this decision, your child may be excluded. So I think there's really work to do to make sure we're clear on when home education is happening and that it's being done at the choice of the parent rather than them being compelled to do it. I think the other kind of key area I touched on is that we looked into alternative provision in the borough as well, which and we focused on the main alternative provision, so the pupil referral unit and Southwark's Inclusive Learning Service, or SILS, and I visited, as did other members of the commission, to see their work. And I mean, there's a delicate balance here. It's clear that the team. The team at SILS are committed to young people, and they want to help deliver positive outcomes for them. But we looked at the results, and they're just from an academic perspective, they are they're really poor, and they've been worsening progressively year on year. And children who leave are most recently leaving without much by the way of qualifications. Now. There are legitimate questions about what's appropriate goals for alternative provision, but what's clear, even from speaking to young people at SILS, is that a lot of them want to be in mainstream education and feel like kind of removed from things in what feels an unfair way. They're like got limited curricula. They can't do some of the things they enjoy, they feel passionate about, and they're far away from their friends. So I think there's a real, so I think there's a real kind of challenging work we need to do to look at alternative provision overall and see, are we satisfied with what it's delivering for our children? The Commission isn't. The Commission isn't, and feels that we need to find another way to support what are profoundly vulnerable children. I've already spoken about the some of the other areas where we had findings, like the quality of data the council's getting and how it should better challenge that. So we did some work with Ofsted and with the Regional Schools Commissioner to just really understand how we could challenge when we're not getting the sort of data that we should. And the Commission recommends that the council takes those steps. And then we just, as I mentioned earlier, set out a bit more detail about a possible charter. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour. There are 9 recommendations that sit behind this. I brought the report to Cabinet this week, and they have 8 weeks to formally respond. I'm hopeful that we can really maintain pressure here and use this as an avenue to get a charter that's bold, that commits to this 100% inclusion approach, where we're not excluding at will. There were clear routes to make sure that children are in a place where they can make the most of their education, even if the typical curriculum doesn't best suit them. Evelyn, I hope that's the kind of overview you wanted. Or is that enough information?
It's perfect. It's perfect, and I think I spoke to you already about this. How I am just still very frustrated about this. The whole aspect of exclusion and what is happening. You talk about off-rolling, which is another form of exclusion, and just the way that schools are getting away with this really angers me. And we know the detrimental effect of being excluded. We know how young people can spiral out of control, spiral into trouble when being excluded. We know their life chances when being excluded. And to me, sometimes this is not factored in by school. But I'm so happy that you're on the board with this and you're leading this, because I know you're very passionate about getting a result about this, and we need to keep pressure. And thank you for pushing it about the charter, because this is one of the recommendations that came out of the serious youth violence recommendations last year. So thank you for pushing that forward. Really appreciate it. I'm going to allow one question, and Sharon's.
No, go ahead. I'll say it after I answer the question.
So Sharon's typed a question, which is there a sense of ownership of the issue from the schools? Glasgow has had significant success in this area. Part of this work, including developing community responsibility and ownership for schools to own the issue, work with the individual, resolving the problem, not going straight to exclusion.
Yeah, I mean, just to
so that's the question for you, Peter.
Yeah, what the kind of the ethos behind it was that the school owns the issue, the school owns that individual, and you work as a community to resolve and work with that individual, because if you're excluding, you're just moving it on somewhere else. So there was a very much of an ownership, and as a school, right, how are we going to work together to support this young person and resolve it? And the exclusion was the very, very last resort. It was a kind of, we own it, they're in our community, so we need to kind of work with the family and the child.
In the best performing schools, you saw that. I mentioned that we had the diocese schools come along, so some of the faith-based schools, and I mean they just kind of spoke to that well, and it seemed reflected in the numbers of exclusions over the last 6 or so years that we looked at. 6 or so years. For others, you got much more of a sense that it's a problem that kind of gets chucked over the fence. And it was both in terms of when we visited Seals, the head teacher there who spoke about the fact that she would know some schools will quite hastily resort to kind of sending them over to a pupil referral unit and be a bit like, okay, we can't do it and that's your problem. Sometimes they wanted to do it with large numbers, and they had to push back, saying like, you can't just like send 5 students our way like that. So it's clear that ethos isn't kind of always there. And one of the kind of concerning things of it is where you saw schools with the highest exclusions, they also tended to have the highest deletions from the roll that weren't exclusions, where there's kind of a reason for them. So it just reinforced that sense that they were finding ways to make sure things weren't their problem and kind of get children to, was the sense that you got from that. And even the thing I just wanted to kind of add in response to your remarks is like, I really do think it's important the Commission continues to apply pressure, because as much as like the Regional Schools Commissioner came in and told us it's school's decision, it's hard to challenge, this is the system. What was powerful was when Ofsted came and they said, look, if a school is found off-rolling, that can be the grounds for us to downgrade them from a good rating. And that's the kind of threat I think schools need to that we take really seriously, and that we will escalate to Ofsted on these things. One of our outstanding schools was, during the course of the commission, looked to be involved in what seemed to be a case of off-rolling. And the parent came to me during the course of the commission, and we were able to challenge it and reverse things. So the kid went back to that school and ended up being a managed move, but ultimately got into a school. They'd spent over 6 months out of school because they'd been effectively off-rolled. And so I think it's something we need to be vigilant everywhere and remind even our outstanding schools that don't do that many exclusions that if they are found off-rolling, we'll take it seriously, we'll take it to Ofsted, and that could threaten their rating. And, you know, we need to maintain good relationships, but they need to know we're serious about this.
Thank you so much. And I think that you probably answered Carl's question about, is there a plan to have the school be held accountable through sanctions, etc. And I think, and this is a challenge to the council, I think that the council has to be a bit more persistent, a bit more forceful in ensuring that, schools are not off-rolling, are not excluding at the rate they are. So, I'm glad you're on this. And I'm going to, last question, William, because of our time. So do you want to ask the question now?
Really, it's not a question, it's just a comment, because I was also on the Scrutiny Commission for Education and Business, and I want to say thank you to Peter for his fantastic report, reflecting the hard work we've been doing. Also been visiting Seals, and to be honest, it's quite promising. They're doing a lot of tailored job with our children to bring them back to the mainstream. However, I agree with the comment on education. The schools have to be involved because I believe in a preventive approach. For instance, a head teacher should be creating a role where someone will be identifying the issues or identifying the special need of the children and working alongside with them, because all the children have got different issues. Some of them, they don't have issues, but we need to be having a very specific approach on that. And this will reduce all the financial waste to invest in school running, off-rolling, and also to fund other learning centers. I think a preventive approach will be the first thing we should focus on to limit this school exclusion. We need to push for school inclusion, and the best way to do that is to work from the school.
Thank you, William. I'm gonna move on now because of timing, but Alice put something in the chat, and Peter, if you can just note this, because I think it's something probably worth picking up. And it says that, is it worth talking to other local authorities who are experiencing the same problem with Harris on a joint campaign? Looking at newspaper reports, seems it is across the country. So this is something probably you can probably look at and see whether you can push this forward. So thank you, Alice, for that. I think that'd be worthwhile. So we're going to move on, and I think I'm going to just change the order a bit. We're going to go to Bethany, but Bethany, if you just hold up for me, I want a Positive Futures group to talk now, and mainly because I know Doreen works with young people who've been excluded, and this is something that you are a lot kind of familiar with, so it'll be good to get your input. And Carl and Nigel, you're still on mute, Nigel, so we'll just look at your wonderful face into the end of the meeting. If you manage to sort it out, please let me know. So I will leave, if you guys got about 6 minutes, 3 minutes each to kind of summarize. If you need more time, just let me know, and we can talk about it. So I'll give you a hand over to you both. Before we go on, just to say, the Positive Futures Fund, I mean, a lot of you will know about the Positive Futures Fund, and it's basically how we have worked so hard with this. As of date, I think we've funded 33 organizations, and they're doing brilliant work with young people within Southwark. And a part of the youth review that's going on, the interim report was talking about the importance of involving young people in commissioning, involving young people in a design of youth provision. And Positive Future it's got it bang on right. This is something that is kind of developed from that. So I just want to hear more from the group who've been funded about their work. So I hand over to you guys.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Can you hear me?
Oh, Doreen, do you want to go first?
Thank you, being the lady. Thank you, Carl. Thank you so much. Before I start, I'm going to ask you just to read something that I'm putting up on the screen, and it will take seconds. I think I've done it right. Can you see it? A letter?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a letter of appreciation from a young person I used to teach who was killed by knife crime. And it just, that's an introduction to what I want to talk about really quickly. So thank you for that. How do I get back? I will try to get back now. Oh my goodness. And you can tell that this is new to me, can't you? Right. You're back. Thank you. That letter was from Rachel. Rachel's son was Kyron, and Kyron was an ex-student of mine who was killed, murdered by a knife, being stabbed. Another student, Michael Jonas, was stabbed to death and killed in a local park, and I'm still in touch with his mum. Raheem Barton, who is a student of mine, Sills 4, was killed. He was shot, and recently Danelle Rule was killed last week, and I went to see his mum yesterday, and Mum asked me to come and see her, and she's just so distraught, it's unbelievable. And the reason I'm talking about this is because after seeing Michelle yesterday, being in the meeting yesterday, speaking to all the other parents, because after seeing Michelle and speaking to all the other parents and just seeing how they're getting on, Rachel reminded me about the letter, and it was very much to sort of boost me because of the way I was feeling. I think, and all I'm saying is something needs to be done. And so I came up with the idea and spoke briefly to Michelle about it today, about a home mentoring advocacy program for parents and families of victims and perpetrators of crime. That program would involve working with a multitude of agencies, but in particular, the education, yacht and social services, doing risk assessments if they're younger siblings, but offering accompanying adults to key and necessary services like when Rachel had to go to the undertakers or when she's got to go and plan the funeral, etc., and how it feels for her. But when the other parents have to go to court, and even though family members are there, they are just as distraught and they need someone who can hold it together. This is what they've been saying. And so offering them guidance, support and understanding, helping them to understand where things went wrong. So getting them counselling, advice from a barrister, because I'm very good friends with barristers who can talk them through the criminal justice system and what happens next, how, processes and procedures. So giving them daily visits, which is what I'm trying to do. I try to do with them all, but I'm one person, no man's an island. Arranging additional external agency support, And then after we put everything in place where they get support, not just from us, but from external bodies as well, they're making a referral to the Identity Project, which is what Positive Futures has funded us for. And I'll tell you about a little bit about that in a minute. And also the parents program that we offer parents, and that's having challenging conversations, which will give them, no parent wants their youngest children to end up a victim or a perpetrator. You know, they want, and so it's very much about changing the mindset, not just of the parents, but of the students as well. So I've got a bespoke team that I'm putting together who are born, bred, live and work in Southwark, who know the children, but are trusted by the families. And this program, the impact of it will improve confidence, it will improve communication. Parents will take responsibility for their children whilst they're alive, guide them, and so ask for support when they need it, which is a lot of parents are not doing that. They're not asking for support because they've told me they'll spend more quality time with their children, take an interest in what their children are doing. So go into school and be confident to talk to the teachers. And if the children are being excluded, managed, moved, told that they need to be homeschooled, say no, have the confidence to say no. And this is what the having challenging conversations and program will do. Just to say, Peter, I was the head at SILS 4, 2015, 16, 17, and every child who left SILS 4 got a qualification. And about 90% of them got good qualifications. They left with 3 GCSEs or more. 2 of them went to university. About 60% of them went on to further education, so it can be done. And I know it can be done because I'm there. I was there. I'm back in there now. Thank you to the Positive Futures. I'm delivering the Identity Project. That came about because of the work I did at SILS 4 and seeing what the students needed. And so it's early intervention. They need that, and they need it from primary school to Key Stage 4 and beyond. And so the Identity Project is not just about who they are, but it's making them so self-aware enough that they can achieve whatever approaches, whatever actions they are taking to fulfill their dreams. They can go away knowing who they are, knowing what their strengths are, knowing what their weaknesses are, and working on it and achieve. This is what they need. So we build confidence. Everything we do is strengths-based approach. We look at emotional intelligence and look at empathy, because they don't know what empathy is. They really don't. But also look at how you can socialize with each other without killing each other, without arguing with each other. Self-regulation, knowing when to regulate yourself, and also perceptual positioning, putting themselves in the place of the perpetrator or the victim or the families that are left behind when they've taken a life. And when I focus on their mindset, and we talk a lot about mindset, it's looking at how their powerful beliefs that they've got can be turned into a positive, so that they can go out and achieve their goals. Because the limiting beliefs that they've got about themselves, they've got it about the adults around them as well, and think nobody can help me, nobody can support me in getting what I want. So it's immediate gratification, and that's not the case at all, and it can't be. They achieve a level 1 or level 2 qualification as a result of talking about themselves, writing about themselves, recognizing not only their identity but their values and aligning their values with their actions. No other project that I know does something like this, where they actually get a good equivalent qualification, GCSE, as a result of doing this. Now, the SIL students they engaged so well, and it took 1 or 2 of them to get started because they don't like talking about themselves. Still work with them online. 1 young man has completely finished the identity program and has gone on to the leadership program, and this is how much they're engaging. This is how much they enjoy recognizing the strengths that they've got, talking about themselves, and the fact that they get a prize as well also helps. So what I'm trying to do is get it on the national curriculum in primary schools, and fighting my way into primary schools to show them exactly how it impacts younger children. You're never too young to start learning about what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and to learn how to cope with the weaknesses and make yourself better, improve yourself. We've got
sorry, can you round up next?
Okay, we've got a young advisory panel as well. Consists of 7 young people from SILS and from St Thomas the Apostle as well, run by two young people oversee it, who I employed, who were SILS students, who are doing really well now. I'm proud of them. They're fantastic. The outcomes so far is 80% average people being successful at school, have behaviors have changed, attitudes have changed, parents are fantastic. I've got a video, but I can't show it, so I'm sorry. So I'll have to email it to you all and say, it's a parent's testimonial, it's worth seeing. Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry I carried on so much.
Thank you, Doreen.
Thank you,
Carl?
teachers.
Thank you. You're mute.
Yeah, hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Awesome, brilliant. I'm really happy I let Doreen go first, because I think what's happened is since we've been on the Positive Futures Fund, every time I'm presenting, I present first and I have to leave. So I've never actually heard her present before. So it was an honor, and I'm super proud to hear you share so much about that amazing program. And we will be totally honest as well. I'm a born and bred Southwark young man, went to St. Thomas the Apostle College, went to Haberdasher Aske's, Hatcham College, and then went off to university and came back and started a social enterprise. And in the 4 years that we've been doing this, this is probably the first time that I've been engaged in a platform where I've seen such incredible work that's going on in my borough. So I feel really proud to be here and be hearing about all the incredible work that you're doing, the research. I know, Evelyn, some of the work that you've been doing for a few years now, but it's really proud. So I just wanted to personally kind of share that before I dive into my own presentations. I did actually have something I wanted to show. I'm not sure if it's going to allow me to share my screen, but regardless, I can speak to the program anyway. So at 2 to 3 Degrees, we run a confidence and self-esteem building program. But 2 to 3 Degrees was essentially launched because in 2010, I failed my A-levels miserably because I was much more focused on looking cool in front of my friends than I was on my education, despite the amount of warnings I got from my Ghanaian mother. Lo and behold, after a while, I had to learn the hard way. And after failing my A-levels miserably, I went off to university and got a first-class degree. And so what I had to ask myself is, how does someone who grew up in an environment where 3 of the friends that I went to school with are in prison for over 16 years for kind of AK-47s and shed loads of drugs, etc., then go on to get a first-class degree, start doing work with the Commonwealth Secretariat in Trinidad and Tobago, Sri Lanka. And after all, I had to be brutally honest with myself and say, actually, I'm not that special. It's not that I was born different, but there were some common ingredients that really helped me on my journey, that when I look around at some of my peers, they're not necessarily getting those things. Those are some of the things that Doreen mentioned, that support network that you need. Someone being able to tell you that actually there are different opportunities available to you. That work around the importance of you understanding what your beliefs are and how you can use them to manifest the life that you want to. And so we launched 2 to 3 Degrees, and luckily we came across the Positive Futures Fund and launched the Success Only project. And essentially this employability program was born out of the idea that there are actually a lot of employability programs that already exist. However, we don't want to create another employability program that throws young people into jobs, because we could have done that. We've got access to the network. But the key thing we realized after doing a bit of research and quite a few focus groups was that a lot of young people in this borough are walking around and they assume that they don't belong in certain buildings. So they might walk to the Mayor of London's office and they might walk past it, but their assumption is, I don't belong there because of the council block that I grew up in, because of the estate that I grew up on, because of the color of my skin or the friends that I'm around. So this program really focuses on building the confidence, the self-esteem, but really changing the narrative that the young people are telling themselves. And we do that by engaging in our activity-based learning when we deliver our programs during the holiday periods. We've partnered with quite a few youth clubs, from Damilola Taylor Centre to Salmon Youth Centre, to really try and make sure that we're engaging with some of those young people that are hard to reach. And some of the employers that we've worked with so far include Converse, include Coca-Cola, Microsoft, who else have we worked with? The Dixon Hotel based in Southwark, London College of Creative Media. And essentially what we did is we partnered with employers to deliver the program at their offices, because a big part of the issue was that we were finding that, and the Gatsby benchmark frameworks kind of matched this up. The issue for a lot of young people is that they don't have the level of interactions with employers by the time they hit 16, 17, 18 years old. So it means that if you turn around to a young person, give them an application form, it's not that they can't write, it's just that they're not familiar with that. But if you compare that to their counterpart who maybe is growing up in a more affluent background, by the time they hit 16, 18, and I know I'm preaching to the converted here, But by the time they hit 16, 18, they've maybe had 5 to 10 interactions with employers already. So a big part of this program is changing that narrative and helping these young people understand that employment, work is the norm. The people that work in these offices are normal human beings like me and you. They aren't robots. Hence the reason why we partnered with these employers to take the young people into their offices to deliver these programs. So we worked with the Dixon Hotel and we worked with London College of Creative Media alongside Chelsea Football Club. Obviously, COVID 2019 hits and all of a sudden you can't deliver your program physically. So we're literally about to deliver a program with Microsoft and then COVID hit and we realized we're going to have to transition online. But I'm really proud to say that that transition online worked really well for us. So we basically went out and did a survey to all of the young people and said, look, before we go and curate a program that we think is going to be right for you, what are some of the skills that you want to build in this period? And the feedback that we got was young people wanted to learn how to stay positive in times of uncertainty. They wanted to learn how to start coding. They wanted to learn what it means to actually build your interview and CV skills. And so we basically created a program called the Stay Ready online program, where we delivered a series of workshops to young people. We had over 300 young people sign up. Not all 300 were in Southwark. I would love to be able to say that to you, but we had a high percentage. I think about maybe 30% of the young people from the program were from Southwark, which was brilliant. And we managed to keep them engaged. And then we did a Stay Ready Part 2 in May, and we're about to launch another virtual pathways program this Monday, actually, in partnership with the Business Launchpad and with Motives, which is going to give young people an opportunity to win a pot of funding up to £1,000 for their business idea. So yeah, essentially the transition to doing work online has been incredibly positive and the young people are really engaged. And I think one of the key learnings for us is if the energy, passion and inspiration of the facilitator is something that they can keep doing online, then the young people are going to reciprocate that energy. I know a lot of youth clubs and organizations were hesitant to taking their work online.
And you round up,
it's actually beneficial. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'd love to share a little bit more about the virtual pathways program that launches on Monday, so I can send it around in an email afterwards. And yeah, thank you.
That's brilliant, Carl. And you know what? Yes, clap, 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 clap. You know, you guys make me proud. You know, you guys, as someone who has lived and raised in Southwark, you know, I'm proud that, you know, you guys are really doing this and you're doing it on your home ground. So it's really excellent. Nigel, I see that your mute button is gone now. So do you want to, and your two colleagues, I've kind of taken up all your time. So you've got a few minutes to kind of summarize what you do.
Yeah, how can I possibly follow that? You know, Carl was a ball of fire there, wasn't he? Yeah, so it's Bar St Peters. So we've been very fortunate to receive 3 tranches of Positive Futures funds. So that's 1, 2, and the virtual pathway as well, which you've just picked up. So we're extremely grateful about that. So we run positive activities for youngsters primarily on the Aylesbury estate, and they come over to us to our centre at the Crypt, which is by St Peter's Church in Woolworth, just off the Woolworth Road. Our usual activities are youth club based, so we'd be running youth club activities on Mondays, Wednesdays, Friday evenings, and also on Saturdays. We've been doing football and things like that. We just got some funding to do football for boys and girls from Leather Sellers, so we've got some additional funding for that and got some new kit, which turned up a week before COVID, which is a real shame. So we're trying to get some stuff outdoors again as we ease out of lockdown. Hopefully we can start some of that stuff back outdoors. We've had to take a lot of our stuff off online because of COVID, which was a real challenge for us. But we actually, Zara, who's our youth program manager, very quickly developed an online program. So we had everything running every evening and afternoon. So during the weekdays, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So we're doing FIFA. We were helping youngsters with fitness, so fitness on Zoom, which was you know, really interesting to watch. Also, we handed around some DIY jewellery kits, so the youngsters could engage in some of that stuff as well. And the other thing that we were doing, which came out of our Positive Futures, 2 residentials that we held. We had a residential in summer and also in autumn last year, which was great to get the youngsters out of the borough and actually enjoy some activities out of their own neighbourhood, which was a real positive for them as well. You know, so one was a cycling trip over to the north part of Kent. So they were coming across, horses and cows and things like that, which they've just never seen before. Absolutely amazing. They were doing canoeing, swimming, really doing some fantastic stuff and getting to know each other. And again, we went to Macaroni Woods in October for the October half term. Again, that was a great week for them to actually socialise together, completely out of their own neighbourhood in the countryside, to do some really positive activities. But the other thing that came out of that was also the one-to-one stuff, because some of the youngsters, once you get them, in their own setting, they're sort of very, linked into each other as a group. But once they're on their own, you see some of their vulnerability. And we actually developed some one-to-one sessions while we were on those activities, which we've now taken into our mainstream work. So that's been included in some of our online stuff as well. So we actually been doing some one-to-one chats during COVID, which has helped some of our youngsters. And one of the other things that we've done as well is help them with their IT. So Notting Hill Genesis has provided some funding for us to get them some tablets and IT stuff, because there's a big presumption that young people can go online, and sometimes they just can't. So we've had to help them with that. So being hard to reach in the real world is one thing, but being hard to reach in the digital world is really tough for them as well. So that's something we've worked really hard on to keep them engaged. And I think they're getting a bit bored of staying at home now. So as we ease out of lockdown, we've already got a programme together to do some footy in Burgess Park, and also speaking to UAE School to use their mugger 3 times during the month as well. So we'll be able to do some outdoor activities to get them back out and socialising again. Because I know we
summarise, Nigel, please. Great.
Yeah, sure. So
Perfect time.
So that's it. I'm there.
Perfect, thank you, Nigel. And I think it's great, obviously, as we're coming to this long summer holidays, it's great that you guys are now able to move from online outdoors, because I think young people now, as you said, are getting quite tired of being indoors. So thank you. And I just want to say a big thank you to all the Positive Futures group. This is just 3 of how X amount of who are doing excellent work. Those who are now doing work on the virtual pathway when COVID hit, I am just in awe of the kind of work, grassroots work you're doing, and I'm glad that Positive Futures was able to kind of fund and support you doing it. And we hope we can continue to work together going forward. So a big, massive thank you to that. And I just say to the panel, I know you guys have been sitting down listening a lot, but don't get too relaxed, because after Bethan's going to present, we're going to now start having discussions about the recommendations and what we think should go forward. If you have any other issues with the recommendation, what we should put in, what we should take out, we're going to now have a time to discuss and really talk to each other. So Positive Futures Group, you are welcome to stay and listen. Otherwise, you can take your leave. So thank you again for coming. Bethan, you've got 10 minutes.
Have I? Okay.
You've got 10 minutes to summarise.
Okay, I had 7 slides. I'm probably going to use 2 of them. So thank you for inviting me. I'm going to talk about the Southwark Community Harm and Exploitation Hub, which is one of the recommendations that came out of the Extended Learning Review, where I was one of the peer reviewers, which happened in January 2019. And I believe there are some of the panel that I may well have interviewed when I came. So the role of the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub is to help produce and tackle contextual safeguarding exploitation for young people, vulnerable adults and their families aged 16 plus. Really important. It's a bit of a change from what is normally a violence reduction unit, which is what the Community Harm and Exploitation, as we call it, the chair, is for Southwark. It's Southwark's answer to Violence Reduction Unit, which is an initiative coming out of central government. We've extended the remit to families because we want to break that cycle for younger children. We want to support, as Doreen said, the parents around having those difficult conversations, working with people. Also, if unfortunately there's an incident like we've had this week, in giving support to people around friends, family and the community. We're also going to look at the exploitation, child criminal exploitation, which is things like county lines, sexual exploitation, but also exploitation for adults in cuckooing, where people's houses are taken over and used as trap houses, or where people sell drugs from, and also modern day slavery, human trafficking. So a huge remit currently, and maybe in the future we're looking to perhaps bring in those things that affect young people with adverse childhood experiences, such as domestic violence and violence against women and girls. The chair will be, hopefully, when we get all back to the office, we were just starting to bring it online, a co-located, multi-agency, integrated team. It's really important to me as the lead for this piece of work that we work with statutory agencies, voluntary sector, we work with young people and residents, and I think that's demonstrated in the projects that we've had speak tonight. They have a place to sit at the table with us to support some of those young people that are finding it difficult and who are at risk. Currently, we have a team that is meeting virtually online. People may, around the table, have heard of the Southwark Anti-Violence Unit. We've taken that and we've absorbed that into the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub for several reasons. It works well, and we must, from the commissioned project reports that we've seen, use what we know works well. It's good practice. There are a lot of people sitting around the table, and the idea is that we extend that offer to young people, families, vulnerable adults, that if they need help, they have a wraparound service that will help them with all of those basic human rights, to feel safe, to have housing, to be able to work with young people, to be able to play, feel safe in their environment. We're looking for other partners, and I think I might have found 3 tonight who are funded across Southwark, who can align with us and work more closely with us and guide us and give us information, example from young people. Are we doing it right? From parents, can we help them in a different way? Are we doing it right? All of those sorts of things. So that whole co-design piece that Caroline spoke about, I think is really important, and we must have young people and service users at the centre of everything that we design. The referral pathways, we've spoken quite a lot about that, will be through the partners that sit at the table, but also I think it's a sign of whether or not we're doing it right if people come from families or are introduced by projects like we've seen tonight, or if young people or families self-refer. So that is what we are, that's what we're trying to achieve. I just want to mention a couple of other things because I'm speeding through this. There was a mention of, are we doing enough with young women? And the answer is no, we don't have any in this dynamic sort of work environment. We don't have any dedicated female workers. We don't have any dedicated female projects, and we need to change that. One of the things we have been offered is a partnership to bid for some research money for a longitudinal study over 5 years to look at how young women are affected within the contextual safeguarding piece. So how do they get involved in county lines? How are they involved in gangs? What's their role in drug dealing? And also how are they exploited sexually, criminally? What keeps them there? All of those types of things. That's with the London South Bank University, and we're working on that this week. Very exciting. I've spoken to a couple of young people who are on our young advisors group. One of those young women has stepped forward and said she would like to be involved in both the bid for the money, and also she's agreed to co-chair with support the stakeholders group. So we've got a young person, age 19, right at the centre of that piece of work. But that doesn't mean that other young people can't put in. The other thing that when we talk about a community harm and exploitation hub or a violence reduction unit, it's really, really important that we fully understand what our problem is. So I think reported crime, reporting data gives us part of the picture, but does that, and that's almost for me like the skeleton of what our problem is, to be able to put the skin and the hair and all of the other parts on the body, we need to hear from those people it's impacting most. And so those are our service users from drugs and alcohol, from domestic abuse services, from our young people who are in SILS, perhaps some of the people who work with you, Doreen, if you're still on the line, and really understand what it is that's having the greatest impact to create community harm within Southwark. So that is a whistle-stop tour. I probably actually underspoke for a change. Happy to send, obviously, my presentation out to people. Happy to answer questions on it if people want to ask questions tonight or in the future when they've read the whole piece. Just want to finally say, oh, I wanted to say something about COVID. Very quick. Okay, so in COVID, it's been raised. We've got to be really, really careful to understand, although young people may have not been out in the numbers they were previously, lower volume does not necessarily mean lower vulnerability. There has been recruitment online. There have been different tactics. I only know some of them, and probably Doreen and Carl and other colleagues have heard of others, but we've heard of specific drivers being used through Uber and some of the other driving services. We've heard of young people using disguises, wearing scrubs or builders outfits to go out on county lines. There's been a lot more online recruitment, especially of young women, which somebody brought up. There is still a buoyant drugs market. People are still looking for it. It is being delivered. So we've heard about C&C, which is click and collect. So we just need to understand within lockdown and coming out of lockdown, we have got some challenges that we need to face. It's a complex issue, and the only way we can do it is if we all work together.
Excellent.
Now I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think, you summarized this concisely, and I think everyone kind of understood what the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub, but just to kind of elaborate a little bit more. So this is our VRU, this is our Violence Reduction Unit, the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub. And this hub is a comprehensive hub, looking at not just the individual, but looking at families, how we support the families, looking at not just what happens indoors, but also out in the community, because we know knife crime is not just, just two young people, stabbing each other. It's a bigger picture. We need to look at everything in its entirety, and that's what the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub is doing. And Peter's got. I'll allow Peter to ask one question, and we'll go to the next phase. So, Peter.
Thanks for the lecture, Chair. Really, really interesting to hear about this. I just had two things I wanted to ask, one, how we judging success, and are we judging that quite transparently? Do we have quite explicit measures that we're checking on periodically to judge how well it's going? And two, just it was great to see such a range of kind of partners involved. Do we have kind of good data sharing plans in place to make sure that they can all work together well?
So two really big questions, actually. So let me do the information sharing one first. So SAVU, the Southwark Anti-Violence Unit, has been running for 8 years and has an information sharing protocol. And as it's in existence, I think it needs to probably be reviewed every year going forward, just so that we're robust around that. I think as new partners come online, then they just get to sign into that if they're in part of Positive Futures, if they're funded by other people. Due diligence has been done, and we need to look at that. But we have to be mindful that obviously there's sensitive information, but that is in place already. The police are being really good and have very quickly offered to brief me on things once my clearance comes through. So, and I also sit with the the summer violence suppression sort of operation that's going on. So I'm hearing and having an oversight of what's happening, and then seeing where those sort of hotspots are. So it's a work in progress, but it's actually a really, really good foundation. As for the measures, we're taking the measures from SAVU again, but we're adding pieces in as we speak to different partners. And I'm really, really keen to capture not only number crunching, how many people are we seeing, how often do they turn up, what's said in those meetings, but I also want that 360 reporting back from those service users so that we can learn from that, but also anecdotal capture in perhaps program diaries, because case and case studies. But the one of the things that the United Nations do is when they actually have somebody working through a program over several weeks, and Doreen may do this in her program, they write diaries so they can actually see their own change through that time, and then you take extracts of that diary to anecdotally support success or learning from each of those. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Sure, I'd love to ask more, but I know Evelyn won't let me.
You know me very well. But I think, I mean, we were sent around the presentation, we were sent around our reduction plan, and I think we would add Bethan's contact details there. I think what I would like to do is do a formal presentation to group one of these days about this. So we'll work something out. And I think just to add to that, I mean, we talk about a women-only group, but Positive Futures have funded Amina Youth, and Amina Youth deal with just ladies, young ladies, vulnerable young ladies. So we have that already as part of a Positive Futures group. So this is something, Bethan, that probably you can kind of link in with and see and work with them and see what they're doing.
They
so
were
thank you so much
to me to visit before lockdown. So yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you so much, Bethan. So committee, we're going to now go on to the big question that was a part of the pack. And it's about next step. And I think in the pack is on page 13. It's on page, I don't know how to share. I might share it wrong. So hold on, let me see if I can share it on my screen. Oh, I think I can. Probably not. No. Yes, I can. Can you see? Can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. So this is the next step. So on the next step, it asks us, we are going to ask or to talk about 3 questions and trying to answer them. First question I want to ask everyone, and please, you know, I'll feel free to talk, and if I can just ask whether we can go just 10 minutes after 8, that would really be helpful. Are all the recommendations still relevant? So that's the first question. Are all the recommendations that we have still relevant? What are your thoughts? Carolina spoke a lot about all the recommendations. Do you think they're still relevant? So if you're not going to talk, I'm going to pick on people. Alice? You're on mute.
I was trying to come off mute. I suppose, I guess my thoughts are just kind of more across 3 areas. And I mean, I feel like, yes, they're relevant, but they need to be tweaked and adjusted. So I can, I mean, I can just give my general comments if that's
please.
useful. Yeah. So I think definitely the presentations were great, and it's brilliant to hear them, and also the evidence yesterday at Assembly I think is very relevant to this. I think we need to add something more on around digital access, and I think, you know, given that we don't know what COVID's going to bring and what, you know, when there's going to be second, third spikes, I think something around like bridging that digital divide. I don't know, it's probably like, you know, a guarantee of every young person having access to the tech they need to engage at home, and not just, you know, schools, but I know lots of the youth programs over the summer are going to be online. I think we need kind of something a bit more cross-cutting on data, and really, and I was just scanning the kind of report today from the Youth Violence Commission. I just think we need to make like that. It's very like we need to make a really strong effort to track and evaluate the data and push. You know, I think we talked before about, and Peter alluded to it, about different partners who are not providing the data. How do you make that kind of happen? I think we could probably strengthen some of the stuff around parents, and I think what Doreen was saying was really relevant. And you know, we've been talking about, you know, parents in the Brandon estate who want to kind of really kind of self-organize themselves, but I think they found it really hard to kind of figure out, and I think COVID obviously made that worse, but how to access that resource and support. I think that's another thing. And then I think funding, I think David was right. And one thing when we were doing the social regeneration charters for different areas was there were already set themes, and actually there wasn't, I'm pretty sure there wasn't a specific one on young people, and we added it as our own theme. But I feel like this should be a kind of standard practice, that one of the kind of the themes of those charters are opening up experiences for young people. So my other one was just around comms. I still feel like, and even more now, more than anything else, that people are inside, we just have to like really look at how we're doing comms to reach young people and parents. So those were my areas. Sorry, a bit of a brain dump.
No, they're brilliant. They're brilliant. Thank you. I'm just writing them down. And I think you're right. I mean, all the things you say here, I mean, we talk about digital divide. Oh, there was a time when schools were ensuring that all pupils had a laptop, and I inquired about that. Are we assured that all our students were given laptops that needed it? And I was assured that we were fine, so that we're fine. But again, we go back to the data and making sure, you know, kind of double checking everything and making sure that this is actually the case. But obviously, there are so many other young people who are not in school. How are they, you know, accessing things online in this day? So it's a really important point. And I think the parents' aspects or area, you agree, needs to be strengthened up. So we'll note this down and see how we take it forward. So, William?
Thank you, Evelyn. I just have another observation two observations. But first of all, I want to say that all the recommendations are very relevant. We just have to make sure that we continuously monitor the processes and the milestone to make sure that we are going in the right direction. I want to talk about the section 60, which is a set of rules around stop and search. I think many young people are stop and search, and they don't know the civil rights around it. And sometimes the reaction is very aggressive because they are in a situation of panic and fear. And I believe that maybe if we ask I think you mentioned an organization earlier, I think it's an independent group for the independent advisory group to link those young people and advise them on their civil right. But it's not just about the civil right, it's also about the behavior. Because when they are in a moment of panic, they could have a negative behavior, and it can wrongly impact on the stop and search operation. So we need to advise them on how to behave and what they should, the way, you know, knowing their right and knowing what they can do or what they can say. I think this will be a very, very important step to take, to add into the recommendation, I think. Secondly, my colleague David Knox, Councillor David Knox, mentioned about the recruiting of the girls. I think this has been like this for so many years, and we know that girls are groomed to carry knives and guns. Even they also used for a network of prostitution. And I think the presentation we heard just now has been very helpful and encouraging. The Community Harm and Exploitation Hub is a very important tool that we need to integrate in our project, particularly in terms of protecting the girls against violence. Thank you.
Thank you, William. I mean, your point about stop and search, the IAG are young people who are going to start advising the police. So for them to also work with the other young people, I think that's a really good idea. That as well as working, so that there would be like a like a mediator between young people themselves and the police. So yeah, okay. So thank you. So Jason.
Hi,
Jason?
thanks a lot. Hello, you can see me and hear me, right?
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, and thanks for everybody's hard work on this and for the representations that we received from those who are recipients of the Positive Futures Fund. I think when Peter was talking about exclusions and off-rolling, I mean, I was rather, I guess, annoyed at the fact that it seems to an extent that as a local authority, we have our hands tied behind our backs because we're either, number one, waiting on academies to give us data, or struggling, number two, to really get through meaningfully with people in academies to address issues around off-rolling and exclusions. And to that end, I think that the recommendations that we currently have are relevant, but I would tweak the section on education to reflect maybe facilitating or convening a meaningful, I don't know, local forum that all schools, I guess, are expected to attend. I know that we don't have primary power over academies, so we can't compel them to attend, but we can expect them to attend, given that they serve they serve educationally those students we look after in theory as a local authority. So I know, Evelyn, that a working group of school leaders had started meeting with the local authority to develop next steps, but I know that that was held back because of COVID-19. But it would be quite good for us to establish maybe a recommendation that says a local forum that exists for all schools where we can meet regularly to I guess, share best practice and take responsibility for collecting and reviewing data on all pupil needs and moves. Would be quite good. Secondly, on funding, which was to David and William's point, I think community infrastructure levy that comes from all the developments that are built across the borough. I do think something should be ring-fenced for young people, particularly from sales, as it's quite a big revenue generating mechanism. And it's an easy one to, I guess, hold a developer to account on, and officers during the planning permission stages and after, when they're drawing up the Section 106 agreement. So I think a ring-fenced funding pot for young people through the community infrastructure levy would be quite helpful. So yeah, those are my two thoughts to things that we can, I guess, help finesse the already strong recommendations that exist.
Thank you very much. I think the part on education, we can put that in, but I'll probably have to task Peter's commission to take this forward, because I think they're having a more deeper dive on this, and Peter will probably have to discuss this after this meeting. So thank you for that. I think the seal one, definitely a good recommendation. I think that's clear one to put in. So Lisa, I'm going to come to you. You're not going to get away with not saying anything today. Is there anything? Obviously, you are a TRA kind of leader. You a leader in the community. You're working with young people. You're on a grassroots. You know what's going on ground. Is there anything in the recommendations that were put before that you think we should either amplify a bit more? Is there anything that you think is missing? And just bear in mind, obviously, we are now in a new world of COVID. You're mute.
Right, so for me, it's definitely the family issue thing. Sorry, I've got terrible feedback. For me, the whole thing about parental support is huge. We've had, just during the lockdown, we had incidences on our estate where we've had young people that have been injured, and what's happened is the parents don't know where to go for support. And with that, what's happened is, obviously, I do a lot of work with Kevin Dykes with the prevention of exploitation in Southwark. So I have a connection with Children's Society. So I was able to get in contact with the lady there and give the parent the information. But unfortunately, all the programs are full. There is no support for parents that are actually trying to get their kids. Well, this is my own experience from this, and I've put months and years into kind of doing this stuff for the kids. And when my neighbour needed it, I had no one to help her. So it's interesting to see about this community hub with the exploitation, because I do remember having the interview with Beth Ann, and actually having that support for people, and actually having TRAs. It's obviously, with the residence review going on, it is a little bit hard, because some TRAs are very proactive, some aren't. Some are very limited in what they can do. Some have a different everyone has a different dynamic on their estate. But it's just that support that actually we still don't have as a TRA environment. We don't have a lead safeguarding person. So if I have an issue, I have to refer. I know how to refer to MASH. But if you've got a TRA that's having an event, yes, okay, you have to tick a box to say you're safeguarding, but who's actually checking on that? And that's my problem with, I've got such a good relationship with Chloe Newman as well. So again, I know where to go, but some TRAs still don't. And it'd be interesting to see where the resident review comes in and how that's handled, because as you say, we're grassroots, we're here, we're living it every day. Lockdown's been hard for lots of kids in this area. The Blue's been absolutely alive with business. We've had a few incidences where, even just on our small estate, we've got 300 properties. We've had a cookering incident. We've got a major drug dealer on the estate that the police know about, and it's still going on. But we're quite a proactive TRA, and we know all about this, and we know, and we put it all forward. And it's just, where's the support? That's my issue. And I mean, I'm learning all about the school stuff and things like that. But as a community, as a volunteer group, you kind of not on your own, but there is a definite lack of support sometimes. It's only if you know where to go for the help, you actually get it. But like I say, with the referral that I did for my neighbour with the Children's Society, there was like, there's no actual space on the programs. All we can maybe offer him is PTSD counselling, which is like, that's awful to say to his mum, because she's like, I'm coming to you because I know what you do and the connections and why you do it. And just to go, well, all that can happen is a little bit of counselling. So this community hub, I think, is an amazing idea, and it's great having the referrals through the programs that actually are being funded by Positive Futures and stuff. But I think maybe you need to look at, definitely like the Brandon, key TRA groups that actually know what they're doing and can pinpoint families or children in need, or families that need support, that can actually do referrals as well.
That's a very good point. And I think the Community Hub and Exploitation Hub, if they can have links, and Beth, I hope you're still on the line. If they can have links with these key TRAs who can then point them or kind of refer some families or young people, that need support, I think that goes a long way in making sure we identify issues very, very quickly. So that's a very, very good point, Lisa. Thank you. We'll note that down. Is there anything else? I mean, the question is there, and I dare ask this, do we need to add anything? I mean, we've already listed certain things that we can kind of bring in. Is there anything glaringly omitted in the recommendations? And before I say that, I mean, there's a caveat, is that we're heading for, it seems like a recession. So we have to be mindful that, with all the things we want to do, there's financial constraint on the council, there's financial constraint in our community, but we still want to be ambitious. So is there anything that you feel is omitted? And I've got Peter.
Thanks, Susan. And I say this knowing that somebody may come after me and just make a great point as to why I'm wrong. I'm comfortable with that risk. I just think there's something really powerful about, like, yeah, sure, we might tweak these a bit, but seeing recommendations home, because there's a lot here where we're like, we have a clear sense of what needs to be done and it's not getting done. So, I mean, it may be that there's a different recommendation that helps underpin these, but it feels really important to get these across the line. Like, there's a lot of them that are amber, even if not red. And even some of the greens based on progress, like on the mental health side, I think they're probably actually ambers. So my instinct would be towards like keeping it as near to what we've got and really pushing those would be a good idea.
Okay, that's great. And I think what I'm thinking as well, obviously we've got the first recommendations last year and we have to keep it as it is because we need to track the progress. I agree with you on that. But because of COVID and obviously this is a reconvened meeting, we have to look at the landscape and the kind of new world we're in. So there are going to be certain things that we need to adapt, tweak or change. And I think what we can do is that under reconvened meeting, whatever's come out this meeting will be, I wouldn't say separate, but it will be like an add-on. A lot of this follows on from the first recommendations, but it just kind of tweaks a little bit in the COVID world, and we have to capture that. But the first recommendation, I was 16 odd recommendations has to stay, and we need to track it going forward. So I think Caroline, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on this, but to have a second lot of recommendation coming out of this meeting. And I'm going to propose, I'm probably going to give myself more work, that this panel meets again next year. I'm very keen on making sure that we achieve what we say we're going to achieve. It's so easy to slip. Things are so easy to fall by the wayside, but this is too important for us to kind of leave it. And I trust officers, but officers are also inundated with work. I mean, right now, community safety department a lot of them have been kind of taken off to somewhere else. They're working in the community hub. I mean, Stephen is actually working very closely with the community hub. So he's doing a lot of things, and our officers are working very, very hard. So, I'm not blaming them because they've got a hands full as well. But we need to help them make sure that we get over the line with these recommendations. So I think we can, I'm not sure what everyone will think about this. We meet again next year just to look at progress and look at where we are with this. And William, did you want to say something? Your hand was up and now it's gone down.
Yes, Evelyn, I don't want to take too much of your time, but just to say that you were asking if there's anything extra we can think of. We can also look at other countries in Europe who have a lower level of youth violence and try to ask them what they are doing. I think this is just a suggestion. For instance, I was raised in France, in the suburb of Paris, and we don't have the level of youth violence in the suburb. There are some issues, but it doesn't come to the point where we see a youngster killing another youngster. So it would be interesting probably to get in touch with them and find out what they are doing differently, why the level of killing between young people is lower. So that's just what I was going to suggest.
So that sounds like a desktop exercise that we can look at. But I'm sure there's parts of France that are very, very lively. Okay, let's not get into the discussion. We can have the discussion offline. I'm very mindful of time. So Caroline, what is the next step forward? What would you suggest going forward with the kind of the new things that's come out of this meeting?
I think a couple of things really. I think the first is, obviously just reflecting on people's feedback. I think in terms of the RAG rating, I think what the team, and I can take this away, need to do is just be very clear about what else needs to be achieved to ensure that all of those recommendations are green. Okay, so in terms of, what needs to be delivered in terms of getting all of those recommendations over the line, including obviously some of the changes to them based on what's been discussed. That will be my kind of first suggestion. Clearly, we do need to kind of think about resources because you've obviously, talked about the challenge, not just in terms of the community safety team, but there are going to be challenges ahead. So we can kind of take those away. I think obviously in terms of reconvening in 12 months, obviously that's quite a lengthy time away. So what I think, if you're okay with this, I would propose that we go away, we revise based on what we've discussed today, and we'll circulate that to the poll panel for their comments and sign off electronically. I do think, obviously, there's been a lot of talk this evening around COVID and the impact. And obviously, Alice has mentioned that she's been reviewing the National Violence Commission. I do think there's pressure to be put on both central government, also regional government, around continuing to fund some of these initiatives, because Beth Ann's talked about the Community Harm Hub this evening. That is heavily funded by the London Violence Reduction Unit and not the council. So I do think we just need to be really mindful, bearing in mind next year is very uncertain, and there is that invest to save perspective. As most of you probably know, in terms of when a murder happens, it roughly costs around £1 million from a kind of resource perspective. And you know, for us, you know, we know that the our local violence reduction unit is roughly funded around that. Well, in terms of when it's fully funded, it should be £750,000. So to be honest, you know, my kind of justification there is it's a no-brainer in terms of invest to save. So I do think that we need to put some more pressure on the funding, external funding side, especially with regards to what we're seeing, or what we're going to be seeing from next year onwards.
Okay.
Evelyn, I think you're on mute.
I've actually did it to myself. Oh my gosh. I said, I like the idea of circulating the outcome of this meeting, especially the recommendations, so we can agree it. I do agree with Peter on making sure that we keep the original recommendation as is, and whether we have to add on the ones that's evolved out of this meeting. I think that's probably a way of doing it. Meeting next year is good. I think we need to, as I say, keep an eye on how far we're going with the recommendation. You know, it could be someone else in this role, we don't know, but whoever it is, I would like them to also maintain kind of a high view on what is going on with these recommendations. And on that, has anyone got any last points you would like to make before we close? Great, that's what I like to see. And so we're just 3 minutes off time. I want to say a big thank you to everyone that attended, all our presentees, those who came to present. Bethan, thank you for the community harm and exploitation. Have you been great? Panel members, thank you for staying with us. Thank you for, you know, making this a focus as well, because we couldn't have done this without you. We can't push this work without your involvement. So thank you so much. And hopefully we see all of you soon. Bye. Caroline and Stephen, can you stay on the line, please?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
See ya.